Are you looking for ways to prevent tantrums before they start? My name's Jodie Thornton, and today I want to talk about what we can do to stop our children from getting into that state of overwhelm so that we have less tantrums less often. Or tantrums less often. So the first thing that we want to recognize is what actually causes a tantrum. So for a tantrum, if we imagine that a child has like a window of emotional capacity, and that the size of that window, this is how much emotion they can cope with before they get into overwhelm, depends on a bunch of different factors. So one is just personalities. Some kids are more easily overwhelmed. Some kids are they just have more grit. Neither is better than the other, but that can actually change the size of their window of like how much emotional capacity they have before they get into overwhelm. Obvious other things that we know of are getting enough sleep and being full and not thirsty. These are some things that can really help. Some other things that change the size of the window are things like how stable our lives are. So if we're going through a change where we're moving house, where there's changes in parent relationships, whether there's been a death in the family, there's all sorts of things that can change our kids' lives. And it makes a huge difference for a child how much brain capacity needs to go into simply the differences in my world. That all makes a difference for a kid in how much emotional capacity they have before they end up in overwhelm. So once we recognize that there's a window that, it changes, the window's depth kind of changes depending on stage of life, personality, what's going on in our lives, then we look at like what stacks up to get to the point where we're in overwhelm. It's actually each time you have a feeling that you don't know what to do with. So if you have a feeling that's kind of minor and not a big issue, you might be like disappointed that it wasn't your turn to play with the Lego. For some kids, that's something that's just like, disappointed, but then it dissipates. The feeling goes and there's nothing to hold on to or worry about with that. For a different child or the same child on a different day, that disappointment, if they don't know what to do with it, it will stack and it'll sit there and wait. And then we come along to the next thing that happens. Something else happens. They don't know how to deal with it. And as we see, it stacks and stacks and stacks. As soon as we have these feelings that are not resolved, and as I say, some of them, we can't explain why, they just dissipate, and others actually stay with us and they put pressure on our emotional capacity. The more of those we have, we're going to eventually hit that overwhelm point. Now, your child, depending on their personality or what's going on for them, their window might be so small that just one feeling is enough to send them straight into a tantrum. Or you might find that they've got quite a lot of grit and they can hold on to quite a lot, but then they're eventually going to hit the edge. And so what we're looking for with the tantrums is we're looking for not stacking them up. And we want to look at how do we avoid those feelings stacking up to the point of overwhelm. So the first thing we want to do is actually give our child awareness of what's going on for themselves so that they can get some help. And that help might actually be self-soothing, or it might be getting some help from you. But it is so much easier for kids to recognize when the feelings are stacking up. It's so much easier for them to recognize that from the symptoms in their body than it is from their emotional state. Partly because emotions are kind of conceptual, they're not as tangible, it can be more difficult to really connect with them. But the other thing is that as our emotions start to stack up, it's almost like we are avoiding those feelings because we don't know what to do with them. So it's very easy for us to get quite emotional without actually recognizing it. And you see this for us adults. Sometimes it's like when we're like, I just need to have a big cry and I don't know what's happened. Or we react over something that's so minor, we don't realize that there were all these emotions just sitting there, we just didn't notice. Whereas if we look at our physical symptoms, if you ask, like, so my emotions sit here in this, I think it's called upper traps or something. If I ask, are my shoulders tight? The answer is yes or no. Like, I mean, technically you can be not aware of your body, but more often than not, it's very easy to go, well, are my shoulders tight? Are they? Maybe, yes, no. Like, it's a much easier question. So we want to notice for our children, most people have one spot where their emotions sit. Sometimes they might have a couple where like maybe anger's in the fists and sadness is in the heart. It can be things like that. But particularly with the stacking of emotions, so it's not so much a specific feeling, but when we're starting to really build up in emotions, most of us have a single spot where that sits. And as I said, mine is up here, so I know if my shoulders get tight, I know that I'm at much greater risk at snapping at the kids or not handling their tantrums well. So I can either do something about that, or I can go into it knowing I'm not actually feeling my best. So we want to notice for our kids when they have tantrums, we want to notice what those things are and remind them, create their awareness. It's like, sweetie, when you were upset, I saw your fist was so tight. That creates their awareness. So then they know when their fist gets tight, it's time to go and ask somebody to help them because they're getting frustrated with somebody else. So that way, before it escalates so far into overwhelm, they're actually asking for help or even self-soothing, depending on what their level of skill is for self-soothing. The next thing that stops the escalation is a sense that their needs matter. So if they say to you, I want ice cream for dinner. I'm using ice cream for dinner a lot these days, but anyway, if I want ice cream for dinner and you say, yeah, I'm not going to do that, we're not having ice cream for dinner, we're having stir fry, it sounds like what I need doesn't matter to you. And that escalates the feeling. So it can be that it just intensifies the one feeling, or it can be that it brings up all these other feelings that I don't matter to you, that I never get what I want, I'm always waiting for my brother, or all of these feelings can come up where it's bringing up what's going on for them or what meaning they're making from their needs not mattering. So the more you can say no or not whenever they're not getting their needs met, is to actually remind them that their needs are always valid, their needs are always important. It's just that sometimes we can't always do what they need in that moment. Sometimes it's like we can't reconcile what they need with other needs. So for example, the ice cream with the dinner, like I also need to look after your nutrition. And sometimes it's because in that moment it's just not practical or feasible for whatever reason. So we want to make sure that in those moments where we're saying to them, you can't get what you need, we're saying it in a way that says, I really wish I could do this for you and I would do it if I could, but I can't. We're giving them that sense that their needs matter. One of the ways you can do this is separating acknowledging their needs from what the next step is. So instead of saying, I understand that's what you want for dinner, but I can't give it to you, it's actually saying, so you really, really need it, huh? And you're confirming, we're giving them a sense that they're being heard, and then after they've been heard, then you say, I really want to give you the ice cream for dinner. I'm worried that we haven't had enough vegetables today, right? And so you can see how by separating those two, gives them more of a sense that their needs matter, not that we're skipping over it. It's like, yeah, I know what you need, but I'm not going to do that. We're giving them a better sense that their needs matter, and that can stop that escalation process so they don't end up in overwhelm as much. And then the last one is actually one of the biggest problems we have with tantrums is when our children don't actually know what they need. So when they say to you, he's not doing what I said, that's actually not getting into what is the need here. So the need could be, I'd like some choice in how we play. The need might be, I would like to feel connected, and when they don't do what I say, I don't feel like they care what's going on for me. It might be, it actually might be, I don't think he cares what's important to me. There's lots of different needs that can be sitting in underneath that. And whenever our children are at the surface level and not at recognizing what is the need, it is more likely to escalate for them because they're less likely to be able to see that they could get that met in different ways. It doesn't have to be this one way that they're fixated on. And also, it's almost like the closer you get to the definition of what the need is that's going on for them, the easier it is for them to go, oh, that is what I need and it is important. So it's much less likely to escalate the more they can articulate those needs. So how do we do that? One of the big ways to do it, one of the easiest ways to do it, is talk about needs when things are going well. So when they're happy, it's like, wow, you really, really love being able to just choose what you're going to do with your whole afternoon. I see the emphasis there is on choose. They're getting to have control over what's going on for themselves. Or it might be you really love when she writes you a note at school because then you know that she was thinking about you when you were at daycare. And see, that emphasis is on she was thinking about you. It's not just, oh, it's so lovely that she did it for you. Like, see, it's so lovely that she did it for you gives us no detail. So the more you can talk about those needs when things are going well, and as well as that, talking about them when things are not going well gives our children more sense of awareness of their own needs, and they're better able to articulate it. So if this is something that you want to build your skills at, is really identifying what those needs are, my next webinar is called Finding the Real Cause of Tantrums, and in that webinar we're going to be looking at how do we interpret what your child is doing and saying, and really distill that into, okay, from what I can see, this is actually what's going on for them. This is the underlying issue. The more we practice that, the more we can do it in the moment, and the easier it is to calm them down when those tantrums do happen. If you'd like to register for that one, the registration link is jodithornton.com/tantrum, and the link will be in the description of this video. I'd really love to hear if you have any questions about today's video, and especially I'd love to know what are you going to try to do differently with your child. Thank you so much for having me as part of your village.